What's up, guys? I've had a lot of people asking about how to do 3D modeling for in-ear monitor creation, and thought it'd be better to just, instead of answering a million questions, just go through one process here with you, show you how I do it. And there's a million ways to do it. It's just one of many. Uh, what I like to do is use free software, though, so I'm using MeshMixer. I'm going to open up a scan of one of my ears here that I've done for someone. And what I find is that this Autodesk MeshMixer program is free. It's really a steep learning curve for me personally. I'm not a 3D modeler by any means, but it definitely is the most effective way to get things done in a hurry. So I'm going to work on primarily just one ear. And if I can get one ear done, in theory, then I can get the other ear done. Is what I would say to everybody. So I've actually done this before, but I am going to start from scratch. So here you can see this is a left ear. You can tell by the way that it fits into the body. You've got the concha here. You've got the canal here. And you've got basically all these different parts of the ear, and this would be an ear impression. This was scanned with an Einscan SE 3D scanner that I have, and turned out really well, actually. So first thing we have to do here is we've just loaded this in, is we've got to orient it and get it sort of into the same area as everything. And I'm also going to do that with the edit align. And that's going to, I'm just going to hit accept, and that should put it somewhere. Now, of course, you can see it's gone because it was so far off the grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to view and recenter view, or recenter, yeah, there we go. And now you can see we have a working area here, a grid. So what I like to do is I like to situate the one of the two scans and then work with the other one and situate it similar so that they're about the same shape and size. Of course, everybody's ears are different, even left to right, they're very different, but having them somewhat be uniform is really nice for the finished product. So let's get this thing situated here and rotated around, then I'll bring the other ear impression in. So I'm going to hit the letter T, and that's going to be able to allow me to transform, which is just to move things around. And just a quick note on MeshMixer, if I hold down my right mouse button and I move around, that pans my camera viewing around. If I were to look at these arrows, I would be able to drag them, three-dimensionally to wherever they go. And these little circles, or rays or something, these I could actually rotate the shape with. So what my goal here is to get it pretty much flat onto this grid, to where I would slice it off, as if I were actually slicing a silicone impression down a line here, and making sure that it's somewhat in line with the shape of the ear, because that's where I'm going to build the cap for this in the long run. Okay, so let's get that thing down to the grid and pretty well aligned. I'm going to hit this W button here, and what that does is it realigns my rotation. And I'm going to set that guy here, kind of just freehanding this to start. And this part of the process is a lot more art than science, I would say. Okay, looking here though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this grid to sort of look at where I might make my cut for the cap. And one thing that's helpful up here is if you just hit this button, you can get an exact view. And I like to orient it so that it's pretty good right now, but basically so that it's pretty square. So this is how it would look if you're directly looking into somebody's ear. Maybe a little bit more to the right. Okay. But yeah, pretty for the most part. Clicking the word right, get there. Okay, so what I want to take a note of here is if you look at where this person's ear folds down here, where you can kind of see that the cap, you'd want it to sort of be in the most indented part of this pathway of the ear here. So right here on this part here. So as much as I'm able to, I'm going to try to make my cut go through there and catch the most indented portion. That's looking good. Over here, Yeah, we're looking okay. I do want to capture, within reason. I'm not going to be able to get all the way down to here, but it's looking pretty darn good. Except for the top here. The top is pretty bad. And when you run into this situation, what I like to do is drop, using the grid, I actually drop the ear impression down. And you see the top of this concha here and this one here. I try to make them sort of equal. And that's, let me look here and see where we're at. Just so the highest point meets the highest point, and sometimes that will help me get pretty good cut going. Yeah, in this case I don't like that because this is now totally not parallel with the cut that I want to make, and I want the majority of the cut to be in line with the ear shape. So I'm going to rotate this, drop this down, catching that part there, the most indented, catching that part there, looking around the side, that's looking good. That's, for me, I'm thinking that's about as good as I'm going to do. And if you look here, I'm going to basically be coming out with the cord that plugs into the inner monitor off of this depression here. So that's going to end up going about here. So this is about as good as I'm going to do for orienting the left side. So I'm going to leave that here. And when I'm done, I can either hit enter or I can click accept here. The next piece here is, and by the way, if you didn't want to use the letter T, the way that you would move things around is just clicking on transform. I'm going to load the next scan in. Oops, I'm not going to do it that way though. I want them to be on the exact same file, so I'm going to hit import. I'm going to click append, because I want to keep both scans on the same one. And on my desktop I've got this guy. They're far away from each other. Do you want MeshMixer to try it automatically? Yeah, sure, why not? It doesn't work usually. Yeah, it didn't work. Okay, so what we want to do is what if you see, and then the scroll wheel zooming out is how you can see where we're at. And I don't even see where it put the new scan. So I'm going to go to View, Recenter View. Oh, look, there it is, up in space. So we now have an object browser window. So whatever one is selected is the one you're going to be working on. So this is L for left, R for right. I'm going to highlight the left. I'm going to basically click on the eyeball so I don't see it anymore. I don't see it, but because it's selected, I kind of get this phantom look here. So if I click on the right, now I can just work with it and orient it. So I'm going to go here, edit, align, accept, and that gets it back into the same atmosphere at least. Okay, so now again, view, recenter view. Okay, and just to show you again, if I re-enable viewing the other one, you can see here they're pretty close. Okay, and the right, the brighter one, the one that's not dimmed up, is the one that's basically selected. So I'm at T on my right, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, well, I should probably hide the left for now. I need to get this guy sort of similarly oriented to that other one. So what I like to do is get it to where they basically are mirror images of sorts. And so I'm going to go to my right, I'm going to rotate that. Once I can get them sort of mirror images, and by the way, you can Cartesian, move these, but another way is that if you grab this green triangle along that plane, along that axis, you can move it, both the X and the Y at the same time. So this, kind of, what I can do here is get a similar orientation by looking at how it is seating. And right now, what's interesting is that you can see that as I move it up and down, I can get a very similar look, or I can even rotate it to get closer to a complete match here. I don't know, this is, again, more art than science at this point. And if I were to, look at this concha and this concha, it would definitely say that the selected, it needs to be down just a little bit more. And now looking, I can see, yep, I'm hitting that most indented spot there. I'm going to hide the left for now. Over here it gets pretty weird. That though I can clean up with some smoothing later. I actually like this. That's pretty good. Okay. So, I'm going to enter so I can finish my movement here. And see them both at the same time. So we're pretty good. We got these oriented pretty well. And the next step here is going to be to slice these bottom chunks off and basically trim the canals so that they're similar for each ear. That way you can have that similar sound characteristic of the length of tubing between your driver. Moving to the next step here, let's just work with one of them at a time. Let's work with the left side. First thing I want to do is I want to make a copy, because I always want to kind of keep steps. So I'm going to use this button with the two squares down here to make a copy of the object, and you'll see it show up slowly. I'm going to hide the old one. It's kind of like preserving it. I'm also going to make a copy of the right one. And I'm going to hide the original. Okay, so these are really, really detailed scans. They're way beyond what I would need to actually have in order to do this process. So with that, I'm actually going to dumb them down a little bit so they're easier to work with and model with. So the way I do that is edit, and I'm going to go make solid. And make solid is your friend. Whenever you're having weird editing issues, if you go and do this step, it typically helps all of the processing work a lot better. I always work with an accuracy and a mesh density of 200 every time. And once you set those, you can hit update. I also like to do an accurate on the solid type, and it just basically, it seems nice, works for me. Your mileage may vary. So at the end you hit update. Once you've changed your settings, it recalculates. And then you can hit accept. And you're going to create a new object that now has the word solid. So since I don't care about this one because I already have a copy of it up here, I'm going to highlight it. And it has to be visible in order to delete things. So I'm going to highlight it, make it visible, and delete it. I'm going to also do the right copy. I'm going to edit, make solid, and when I do this, same thing, accurate, 200, update, accept, remove the old. Okay. So now I've got these somewhat dumbed down versions of the shapes here. Okay, now from this point on I'm going to start doing some steps, but I am going to basically focus on just one of the ears, and you can do your own. But looking at one of these shapes, let's talk about the ear canal. Here the ear canal goes in, and it makes that first bend up this way and the second bend, and whenever you get ear impressions done they tell you it needs to go beyond the second bend, and this was it was pretty good, because what I like to do personally, and this will create some differences of opinion, is I like to cut it right before the second bend, and I'm sure some people want that full impingement all the way to the eardrum that goes up to here, but for my sake, for comfort, for the quality of sound, I like to just cut it here and then basically grow the size of the canal of the impression so that it has a good snug fit, and I have not had any issues with that personally, but that's for opinion and debate. Okay, so we are going to chop the end of the canal. The way we do that is we do an edit. Oops, we have to have it selected. Edit, plane cut. A plane cut's a cool tool because it allows you to basically drag your mouse, or you can use the orienter below, and that is going to remove everything. And you can do different kinds of cuts. You can cut, discard half, slice, keep both, and I don't know what slice groups does. And we're going to discard half, and the part that's left is going to be the part that remains. So this will be bad, obviously, because if I hit accept here, well, now I've lost everything. So I'm going to Control Z to undo. I'm going to actually hit this big fat arrow here, and that you can now see is going to leave that. Okay, so I'm going to try here to get somewhat in line with that second bend. And I think that I've got it here. Maybe like that. This is art. If it's science, you're paying $1,200 and getting an awesome pair of 64s or UEs, but this is more artwork here. Okay, so that looks good to me. Let's hit accept on this and check my work. Now, of course, this would be really painful to jam into your ear, so I'm going to show you that we are going to smooth these edges out. But I like that. And in essence, with the right side, you would line up another plane cut here, or whoops, you would line up a similar plane cut, and you would go here, and you'd, let's see, what did I do here? And I'm not, basically make them match, make the same angle match. But again, we're not going to focus on the right, but you can just assume that if you have them pretty similar in shape and size to start with, they're going to look the same when they're in ears. They're not going to have one cap sticking way out further than the other side and be all strange looking. So this is actually a very helpful part of the process. Okay. That being said, I am going to remove that right side from view, and I'm going to work on just this left. Okay. Next step is to cut this bottom off of this, and because I use the grid to orient, it's pretty simple. I just do edit, plane cut, and click left up here so we can see it. Zoom in with my scroll wheel here quite a bit. Oh, a little too far. I'm going to just move this actual cut down to the plane itself. Pretty close. Enter. Alright, we've now got the beginnings of an impression. Okay, a couple things before we go further here. This is gonna hurt. Anything that's a sharp edge on your ear is gonna hurt. So what I like to do when I get into these kinds of situations is basically chop things off that don't belong. And the easiest way I've found to do that, because you can always smooth it later, is to grab your select tool over here, and then you can start selecting things, and they'll turn orange. You just select randomly, and as you left click, as I basically hold down Shift and click, it'll remove the parts that are selected. If I double left click on an object, the whole object gets selected. Similarly, if I hit clear selection, I lose it all. Okay, so all that said, on the select tool you also have a brush size, and brush size is just your precision level. I'm going to go with like a 30-ish. I'm just going to cut this whole thing off. Move my object browser out of the way here. And I'm going to try and make this be more smooth and round, so just kind of freely looking at it. Oops, I actually selected something extra over there. And get it down here. Yeah, I don't like any of that being selected. Okay, delete. Okay, now I got a big old hole. What do we do? Well, remember, make solid is your friend, so we'll clear the selection. So we now have the whole object here unselected, and go to edit, make solid. You see how the quality went down when I did that. That's a problem, so I'm going to go back to accurate, and like I said, every time 200, 200. Sometimes I do 199, I don't know, just really close to 200 is good, then hit accept. Okay. Now, you know, overall, this whole model, we're going to smooth it some. But because I've created this really weird jagged spot here, I'm going to select that spot that I've made. I'm going to use a little bit bigger brush, 40-ish, I don't know. And go right along the edge of my hack job here. I've selected all that spot. Maybe unselect with shift a little bit of this so I can keep a little bit, but I'm going to kind of basically like sandpaper once I've got it selected. Go to deform, smooth. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. You can do it with a smoothing scale. You can do it with different amounts of constraint rings. The less constraint rings, the more smooth it gets. Or, you know, if you're just in a hurry, you can just do what I do, is just max smoothness on this part. And then clear your selection. And looking at that, you can now see we've smoothed out. Now there's a bit of a knife edge here. Doesn't look like it. It looks pretty smooth, but that's actually going to hurt because it's not really smooth like we would like. So I'm going to just select that like knife edge-ish part there. Deform, smooth, max smoothness, accept, clear selection. Okay, that's pretty good for now. You might even take a plane cutter, you know, you might even trim some back here and redo that process if you don't like the way that it fits when it's done. But to me, this looks like it'll be great. Okay, next step here, I like to keep some notes on this, so I'm looking at some of my notes over here on my other screen. We've got to basically smooth the entire impression, and I like to do this a specific way. So because we've got this here, and by the way, did you see when I made it solid again, it added another solid, so it kind of gets confusing a little bit. I'm just going to rename this by double click on the name, just call it left. You know, something more descriptive might be left raw. I think it's a raw design, there's not much done with it. So I'm going to take that guy, I'm going to make a copy of it and hide my old version so I'm working with a new one. So I kept that step. So now I'm going to hit edit. Oops, I can't, I got to select it all first. So to do that, select, double click on the whole device here. Okay, deform, smooth. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I like to do a smoothing scale of 35. I leave everything else the same. And when I hit tab down away from it, or just click away from it, you'll see that it actually smooths that whole model pretty nicely. And what we're trying to simulate here from the old invest and pour method that I used to use is you're trying to smooth it, and you're trying to create a little bit better seal by growing it through this process, almost like you were dipping it in the paraffin wax with the toothpick, the old impression, the old days. Okay, so that done, I'm going to hit accept, and it's going to leave the model selected, which is cool, because what I need to do now is grow it just enough so that it fits more snugly in the ear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit edit, extract. I'm going to extract the selected portions of this object, and I'm going to do normal mode, meaning, so if you see there, constant was just in a single direction, normal does the entire object, and I'm going to do the offset of 0.25 millimeters. And that's now a little bit bigger than the old model. While it's still selected, I'm going to, this whole face group that's selected, I'm going to hit T. You could do it another way like I showed you, but now that I've done that, I'm going to drag this over and I can explain to you a little bit, and hit accept so you can see this. If I press down on my scroll wheel, not scrolling, but just click it like the third button, I can actually move the camera a little bit, which I'm going to do. And you can see, I mean, it's hard to tell, but this selected piece is a little bit larger by 0.25 millimeters in every aspect of this. So that's going to fit a little bit more snugly as it goes into someone's ear and create a better seal and better fit. While this is done, I'm going to change, I don't need this piece now that I've got this, so I'm going to hit modify my selected area and invert. or I could just frankly hit the letter I, and then I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to get rid of everything I don't need. Okay, now that that's done, I've only got the grown smooth part of the image. I need to put that back to where I need it, so I'm going to hit edit, align, and recenter my view. Okay, cool. So I got some good bones to work with here to make a model. So the model next, I'm going to have to do some things here. Just looking at it, I'm going to have to extract this faceplate area out, make it hollow so I can fit drivers and tubing, cut some tubes in here, make the ear canal bigger so that it fits better. So all that's a lot of work. We're going to do that right now though. So when I've taken this face group, you'll remember that it was not a solid object, it was just the face group. So to make it solid, I'm going to have it selected here and hit edit, accurate, 200, 200, update, and I'm going to just hit accept because I know it's good. Okay, so now I'm working with this step here. Actually, this was kind of an in-between step anyway. I'm going to just delete it. And, yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to call this one left smooth. Why not? Alright, while I'm doing this, I need to now look at that canal tip there. I'm going to take I'm going to leave part of this area flat because it's easiest to add the tubes later if they have a flat perpendicular surface to hit. So I'm going to select using about a 45. It's been pretty successful depending on your ear size, but again, it's art. I'm going to select right off the edge, holding down my left mouse button. I'm just going to work my way around the entire edge here. And you know, I'm going to actually do a little bit more than that. I'm going to just round this whole end off. The important thing is just to remember exactly what you did on the left here, then do it on the right here. Work at the same time, you know, doing one step on one step on the other, so you have consistency. You know, if this was entirely selected here, I just kind of hold down shift. I'm going to create a little flat area by not smoothing it. This will help for the tubing later. Okay, so now that I've got that area selected, I'm going to go again to deform and smooth. I'm going to do max smoothness, hit accept and clear the selection. You're going to see like what looks like little welds on the part where I've actually done the work, and I got to tell you, you'll never see that when it actually prints. Even on a high resolution SLA printer, you just won't see that, so you don't have to worry too much. So that compared to, you know, what it used to be is pretty smooth, and that's going to be a lot easier to get into somebody's ear. Okay, next step while I'm here is that I need to basically get that canal tip extruded. For most ears, a 0.75 millimeter all around, but for really small ears, a 0.5 millimeter would be helpful. Again, we've already done 0.25 millimeters, so this whole canal will be about 1 millimeter bigger than the original perfect scan, so it'll be snug. Select. I'm going to just work my way around here, selecting that where this bends, where the first bend is. I'm going to try to avoid the part before the first bend, but I'm going to try and get everything from the first bend in the canal. And the entire canal, so all this gets done. You're scribbling here. Making sure I got it all. Looks good to me. Okay, now I'm going to hit again edit, and instead of extracting it away from the model. I'm going to actually extrude it out on the same model. So if I hit extrude, you can see, I'm going to just for a minute show you from so you can see what the different methods do. Constant direction does it in one direction. Normal grows everything. X-axis, Y-axis. So you can see kind of the weirdness that you can get into trouble with here. Z-axis. I'm going to do, I only ever use normal or constant. And constant would be bad because it would just drag the whole ear canal up. But I'm going to do normal. And again, the amount is very, very nominal. It's 0.75 millimeters. And what you can see there, it's almost going to throw like a helmet on the end of it. So with that, I'm going to hit accept. And I'm going to clear my selection. Now I've got this really jagged, weird thing going on the canal that would hurt. So I got to take my select tool. And I like to use a large brush for this process, like a 65. And I like to go right off of that jagged spot where it hits the earpiece here. And kind of just want to make sure I don't get beyond the canal. Yeah, see, that's a little bit much. So I'm going to use shift, and so I'm trying to just smooth it. So down to that first bend, I'm going to kind of get rid of that. So this will be a good amount of smoothing that gets done. And that's okay over there. Okay, so now what do? I'm going to hit deform and smooth. And now this is kind of where you're going to use some poetic license here. One way that seems to work is a scale of 70. But you can mess with these settings. For me, that's what I'm going to do, because that looks pretty good and it creates enough of a nice bulge here on the ear canal to really create a good seal. You could just go max smoothness like this as well, and that would be nice and smooth. It's really up to you. I'm going to do the shape preserving though, so I can keep a little bit more of this breadth here to really get a good seal. And again, constraint rings are interesting, because if you change this from 3 to 2 to almost none, you can see what that does to it's how much of the shape gets preserved. I'm going to do like a 2. Looks good. Clear selection. You can still see that it's grown a bit. And I see a little weird, like a little spot here I don't like, so I'm just going to select that. Sometimes when you do this, again, this is just being overly concerned. Just one click there. Smooth it. Yeah, sure. Clear it up. A little better. That would never actually show up on the print, so it was just a waste of time. Okay, so now that we have this nice earpiece, the part that's not in the ear is the next part we have to focus on. So doing that, I need to extrude this cap area. I'm going to do it about 14 millimeters in total. So to do that, I like to basically take something that looks similar to really the African continent is the thing that comes to mind, and I'll show you what I mean. I'd like to do a flat-ish straight part here, and I like to move down to the bottom, and you can add and remove a bunch of this. And really the important part here is, remember how this came down, this is where our cable is going to be. So our cable will be connecting out of this. So kind of as much as I can, getting a straight-ish extrusion at the angle that I want that to come out. So if that came out, I actually don't need any of this. It'd be more like this here. Looks like I got, oops, escape because I don't know. Oops. Control Z so I can go back. There we go. Again, I'm just using the left click and holding it down, or when I'm removing something, I'm holding down shift and doing that. But I'm going to select this area. It's looking pretty good. But you can see it kind of looks like an African continent. Okay, with that, I now have to extrude, because I'm just pulling out a part of the model. So to do that, edit, extrude. I'm going to do it again, 14 millimeters. Now this is interesting, because before I've always done normal. But this time I'm going to do constant, which should do as best as it can perpendicular to the shape of the selected area. And since I selected a flat area, it's perfectly able to extrude it. Okay, so I'm going to hit accept on that constant extrusion. There we go. I'm going to clear the selection because you can see there's some. Okay, so this would look really weird, but there's a point to this. I'll explain. With this, because I've kind of extruded this, and I don't know what kind of polygons are going on here, and because I'm going to be doing a lot of smoothing, my next step is always to make solid, so I can get an even, amount of polygons for working with for smoothing. So I'm going to do accurate, 200 on the accuracy and mesh density update, and accept. Okay, so now I've got this shape, and what I need to do with it is I need to plane cut it. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to do two kind of orientations of the plane cut. The first is I'm going to kind of put this thing, eyeballing it, not scientific, right in the middle. About, I think about like so. You can zoom in and kind of pan with your center mouse click again. Yeah, I mean, good enough for me. Okay, so there's a short way and a long way that it's going to cut. The short way that it's going to cut, I like to angle it about 7 degrees away from the canal. So to show you what that means, I can do this. Now if I'm up here on these snap angles, these are cool because you can get an exact angle. But if I don't want it to be exact, I just move away from them. And because it's on by 5, and I'm looking for about a 7, I'm going to go to outside of that. Okay, 7-ish. Right there. 7.04 is pretty darn close. Okay. Then, so because I want, it's hard to really get this oriented so you can tell, but I want the cap to kind of pop out a little bit because the cable needs to be able to come out. And so the cable should come out right here, so I need to create a bit more space here, and yet I want it to also come back towards the ear more. So with this 7 degree here, I like to do that. Now on this way, the lengthwise, I like to do about a 5 degree angle. So because I can do that on the snap, I'll do that there, and on the longwise cut. So that ends up with what I think is a pretty fail-safe shape. So I'm going to hit enter on that. And now I've got myself a pretty good shape. The next step is I gotta get this thing aligned and laying flat on my grid here. So I'm gonna hit my T, go up, and kind of just, kind of gonna just eyeball it and get it pretty flat compared to the grid. I'm gonna do the same over here in this orientation. And once you get it kind of close, then you can go to edit, align. Sometimes it doesn't do a great job here, so in this, yeah, it's still got a ways to go here. So I'm going to rotate it down. I'm going to look this way and rotate that end down a touch. What you're trying to do is get it to lay totally flat. There you go. Pretty good. Okay. So now that I've got my plane cut done, I've got to smooth the junction of the cap area that I've created to the actual shell. What I like to do here is grab a 55 brush and kind of work along the seam work along the edge. I got a weird click out there. No, we're good. Okay, now that I've got that selected, I'm going to deform, smooth that out. I'm going to go back to like a, I don't know, 70 again. And maybe change the constraint rings down to like just one, just a single one. That's looking pretty good. And that should give me a nice flat surface for when the 3D printing happens later. Clear the selection here. Yeah, pretty good. That layer should be flat. Okay, you know, if you want, you can also now take your brush and do like a, yeah, 55, sure. Kind of this weld that it's created. Go along it. Making sure that you don't mess too much with this area. But everything outside of the ear coming down to a taper, you don't have to worry much about. You can re-smooth that out. There you go. Pretty close. Not perfect, but it'll look great. It'll fit great. Okay. So now that I've done this, I've got to basically, I've smoothed that junction. I need to get ready to put in a connector for the cable. That's the next step. So what I've got here is I've used a micrometer to measure my particular MMCX connector. I'm going to import that. I've basically built it. I'm going to append. I'm going to go to my, boy, where do I even have that stuff? Probably in here. MMCX. You can see here I've got one that I made, and then I expanded one by like a 0.2 because of my 3D printer. And I've renamed one that an actual size here, but these are STL files, and this is that mix file, which is the MeshMixer working file. So I'm going to use this expand. I'm not going to use one that says do not use, because when I printed with an actual size without expanding it first, it didn't have enough room, enough clearance for me to get that jack in there glued in nicely. So I'm going to use this one here, and when I bring this guy in, he is off in left field. That's not too bad though. I can move him. So I'm going to hit, because it's selected, you can see down here, I'm going to hit T. Oops. I'm going to kind of move him closer. Alright, so this is the cable housing here. This is, or the jack housing. Where this ends up, if you look at it here, is going to be where the actual jack will be glued into this. And there's kind of an issue here because I need this to be about halfway or 3 millimeters in here to really be nice. So I'm going to grab this and just kind of put it right on the edge of where I think I would like it. And I think I would like it about there. I think right in the middle here, I'm going to go up of this space that I've created. Looks good. I also think I'm going to rotate this like 180. I think that's how I want it. You see, a lot of this is I'm saying I think. Now the problem is this jack, if I were to glue it in, it'll be sticking out here. So how do I make this made up to this piece, the MMCX connector made up to the in-ear monitor in a good way? Well, I'm going to leave that guy there for now, and I'm actually going to add a cube and kind of use it as a place that will create a flat surface that I'll smooth into this. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to do that with the mesh mix. I'm going to hit accept so I can get off of that device. I'm going to mesh mix a cube. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. So when I do this, I'm going to change the size of this cube that I just brought in. I'm going to do uniform scaling 5.5 for now. And when I do this, I'm going to basically drag it to where I think it should be. Actually, you know what, if I edit a line, let's see what that does. New cube that I selected. Got it pretty close. So let's move it out here. And I'm not liking that. It's going to have to be bigger because that's going to be hard for a 3D printer unless you got a nice SLA. So I'm going to do like, let's do 6.6-ish. And it doesn't have to be as tall though, so maybe, 6 on the middle. Oh, I got it. Looks like that was the Y. And that's pretty good. Now what I want to do is get the very least amount of this required to create a flat surface. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of seeing down here how the shape is, and I want this to go right up to that edge, just where it need to be flat, where this MMCX connector hits this. And I want it to be perfectly, I'm going to try and do this a little bit, this a little bit. Ooh, see, there's a weird overlap. There's got to come just a touch to where the connector, there we go. Because the cable itself is larger than the connector that will connect here, so we want to have that nice flat surface for it to hit up to. Okay, that's going to be a good happy medium. Okay, so now that I've done this, my MMCX punch, I'm going to hide it. You can kind of see what I'm working with here. Alright, so I need to create this and make this into one device. How do I do that? Well, I got to have them both showing, which I do. I'm going to have to select both of these objects at the same time by holding down Control. Now they're both selected. I've got some options here. Again, there's probably 10 ways to do this. What I do is I do a combine or a Boolean union, but I'm going to do combine for now. And now it's now one object, and I can now, as one object, I can take it and I can make it solid, so I can add the polygon counts here that I need. So I go accurate, 200, 200, update, and accept. It looks kind of weird, but it's pretty good, especially at the level of detail we're at here. So I'm going to select my edges with like a 45 brush, maybe like a 35 or a 40. And kind of select the seams. Oops, that's not good. Deselect that. Select the seams. Yeah, sure. I'm going to deform smooth that. Maybe a little bit more smooth. Just enough to keep a nice flat area for that. Okay, we'll accept that. We'll clear the selection. That looks good. So now, if I show you the punch, you can see I've got a nice flat surface for it to punch in with. Okay. What do we got to do next? Well, we now have the basic shape. Copy it. I'm going to just, it made 2 copies, that's weird. Getting a little bit crazy. I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to call this left blank. Like no punching, no hollowing, no tubing, nothing. Just call left blank. And by the way, probably a good idea to save your work as you're going. MeshMixer's gotten a little bit better. I call it WIP. I use that for work in progress. Because it does recover a little better than it used to, and somewhat brings you back to where you were. But I've lost a lot of work. You can imagine if the program crashed right now, all the work that'd be lost here. Okay, so now that I've got this thing here, he's the left blank and he's the only thing selected, I can work on doing things like hollowing it out. Now, they have a really cool feature that will turn this into a hollow object, which is nice for 3D printing because you have a lot less material, but one thing that it can do is an exact offset around every edge to do that. So what we need to do is there's a couple things that I want to call out of note. We definitely need to have an MMCX here. We will need to have a more solid canal here, from here to the tip of the canal, because you don't want to just have a tiny little hole where it could shatter easily. You want it to be pretty reinforced for the tubing. So to do that, I like to take a couple copies of the things I'm working with. So I'm going to copy this MMCX that's perfectly in place, and I'm going to take a copy, and I'll just hide it, and take a copy of the actual in your monitor, just hide it. And working with this, I'm now going to make punch this out of this, or Boolean difference. So the way you do a Boolean difference is you select the main object that you want to end up with, and while holding down Control you select the object that you want to remove from it, and you go Boolean difference. You can see it's going to punch a nice hole in there for us. So for precise, I'm going to go back up to even higher max quality. I'm going to uncheck auto reduce result because I want to keep the polygon count high. I'm going to hit accept. Boom. So we now have a nice solid object that an MMCX jack could fit into technically. So with that, we now have to take this guy and hollow him out. So I'm going to do hollow. In my 3D printer, it likes about a 1.25 millimeter offset. I'm just got a cheap monoprice select mini printer, and again, I always do 200s even when I'm making a hollow. Update hollow on the solid accuracy and the mesh density. Just thinking. Okay. Whoa. And if I move my mouse around here, there we go. Okay. And you can see that it's going to create a nice hollow area inside, and it's going to work all around every surface by about 1¼ millimeters. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit accept. And this is now hollow. One thing we haven't talked about much is shaders, and shaders are nice because you can get a nice, really easy to reflect and see the shape with a reflective shader. Or, you know, in this case, you might want to do this transparent one. The way you do it is you select the shader you want, and while you're holding it, you just drag it onto the object you want to make that. So now that I've created it as a transparent, you can see the shape of our object. Okay, so now, of course, we have an issue here with this. This is a solid hole. It's not even a hole, it's a punch, really, isn't it? So you can see that's solid in there. I'm going to take this copy that I made of this MMCX. I'm going to do something. I'm going to use this to actually drill, in essence, into the shell some. So to do that, I'm going to, I hate this weird orange color. There we go, it's bright. And I'm going to do transparent, actually, on the shell to work with. And I'm going to move this copy of this MMCX holding down T, and I'm just going to do it right along the axis, so it's exactly in line. I'm going to park it right in the middle of this solid wall, and you can see that if I were to Boolean difference, it would actually knock a hole through. One thing that's interesting about the math, though, is MeshMixer gets confused because these points are all in the exact same place. So for this to work effectively, I have to actually shrink this. So the way I do that is I do uniform scaling, and I just look at this and arbitrarily say, well, it's 9, so maybe it needs to be like 8.9, and it'll scale everything else down, hit accept. And when I do that, now I can Boolean difference. And remember, you select the main device that you're trying to work with, and then the thing you want to remove from it next. Then Boolean difference shows up, and click that. You can kind of see if you look in there now, it's going to remove a nice little chunk there right into that cavity. So we're going to do max quality again. We're going to do uncheck auto reducing the results so we can keep the polygon count high, and hit accept. Alright, so there you have it. We now have a nice hollowed out shell. But if you notice, we also have up here pretty 1 millimeter between, you know, a working in-ear monitor and certain Doom, as anybody knows that's had in-ear monitors on a stage. They take a beating. So I want to fill all this in right in the canal. So the best way to do that is I'm going to hide, basically give it a color first, but hide this, and then the next piece of the puzzle here is, now that that's hidden, I'm going to go back to my copy. My copy was solid, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the canal off of this guy. I'm going to plane cut it. To do that, I'm just going to drag a line about what looks good to me. Look at the side and see if it's about parallel-ish. Maybe a little bit more. And boom. Okay, but now I've got this weird piece hanging out here from the concha. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to select just that one piece, double click that one piece, hit delete. Okay, so now I've got a floating canal. And because I took it at the exact spot, the copy, I should say, I took the copy of this with the exact same orientation, you should be able to see that it's right there in the canal, and that'll create a nice area of reinforcement. So if I do this, how do I Boolean these together? Well, again, these are in the exact same points in space on the file, so I can't Boolean union. What I need to do is I need to shrink this canal, which is, okay, that's the, I'm going to rename that to the canal. This canal, and I'm going to shrink it just a touch, hitting T, or, you know, transform, and uniform scaling, and going from 14.4 down to like, just do 14. And you see how that shrunk, and it just misses the edges there, but it still fills up the whole canal. I'm going to accept that, and now I'm going to take the two pieces, I'm going to Boolean union, or, you know, or combine and make solid. I'm going to do Boolean union this time, just so I can show you something different. I'm going to do max quality, uncheck auto reduce result like I always do. Okay, and now you can see that it's created a nicely reinforced area. So the last piece here is going to be to add tubes and to do a slice here, so that it's 3D printable into separate pieces here. So we'll do the tubing first. Depending on your drivers that you're going to be using, I like to use the Knowles GV quads for almost all of the builds lately, and I've heard good things about the Belsing 6-way drivers. I've heard, you know, I've used the what are they called? From, like, the only place I can get them is from England. The Sonians 1723s, those are wonderful dual drivers. You know, there's all different kinds of drivers, but you know, you're gonna find out. I need either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 holes here on the end of this, and the most I ever work with is 2. So I'm gonna grab a tube and throw it on here right now to start. I'm gonna actually pick a color to work with. Ugh, it burns my eyes. Let's do something a little cooler. Okay, and so the idea here is that you're going to have a tube that you're going to use to drill out here, and you do it 2 times. 1 for each of the acoustic tubes, since I'll be using the GV quads in this build. So I'm going to go to MeshMix, I'm going to add a cylinder, and that's going to be my tube. And I like to do about a 3.1 by 10 by 3.1. And that's so that the tubing that I use, that's what I've found works best for me. And I believe, man, is it 13 standard tubing? I think it's 13 standard acoustic tubing from Westone that I use. 13 or 16. So I don't have that, but that'll come later. Hit my T here. I'm gonna edit a line so I can get it close to where I want it. And hit T so that I can move it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get it as close as I can to the face here of this guy. go. Of course, I want it to somewhat be perpendicular to this, so the way I like to do that is I like to rotate it. Oops, that didn't work. What's going on there? I hit accept and got confused. I don't know if I L. Okay. Okay, good. That worked. I don't know why, but alright. And I like to kind of go along a plane here, because when I get this one perfect, I'm just going to make a copy of it and then drag it, and the orientation will be the same and such that I can just find that red arrow. So I actually like that. So to make sure that it's, oh no, have to make sure it's perpendicular. Or off there as well. Perpendicular to the flat spot that we create. Okay. And then in my mind, if I'm thinking maybe it needs to be here because I want it to be somewhat centralized. And I want to do another one over here, so I'm going to point it to where I think I'm going to put the next one. Okay, hit enter. Okay, it looks good. The only problem is I don't know if it's going to run into something, like a sidewall here, or if it's not going to go all the way through the canal reinforcement that we made. So I have to go to my shaders and drag the transparent one over. Looks like we just barely made it, and it looks like it's going to just barely miss the sidewalls. You do have to get somewhat creative with your placement of tubing because of this. I'm going to move it down just a little bit because I've got some room. It helps my brain see it better, orient it better. But you will figure it out. You might have to go at a different angle. It might not be perfect, but as long as you make the cut in the canal at that first bend, the sound quality will not change, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so I'm going to call this one tube and make a copy of it. So now it's selected the copy. So now I'm going to hit T. And because of how I oriented it first, I can actually just drag this down over a little bit. And you can see by looking at it that it's going to be pretty good. If I go to my transparent shader, just making sure that I didn't nick an edge here. No, we're good. Looks good. Okay, and the next piece, one of the final pieces before we slice here, is going to be to actually do the Boolean difference here. So I'm going to now select the main device, which is this one, and what I want to remove from it, which is the first two, Boolean difference, max quality, uncheck auto reduce result, accept. And now you can look here and you can see that we've created a nice drilled out hole for the acoustic tubing there. Now we're going to pick up the next one here, Boolean difference. We are almost done. Max quality, auto reduce result, accept. Okay. Now the last piece here is that we've got to just slice this into separate pieces so that it's actually printable with a shell and a cap. So the way I do that is I just use my plane cut again. And go grab a plane cut. Now this is kind of very subjective. I'm going to make it transparent. I personally like to get my plane cut down to where it's just barely above the cap. And if you were looking here, the way that this is going to print would be a little bit rough because you'd have to create this weird area that the 3D printer might struggle with to bridge this. So I'm going to come up here and actually, if I zoom in, I'm going to actually go right above the connector here. Did I get it? Did I get it? I think I did. I think I got a little bit of space here now. Now on this one it's different because we don't want to actually remove half or discard half. So I'm going to do a slice. I'm going to hit accept. And then it looks like it's one object, but it's actually two. The way you kind of get it separated is you just hit separate shells. So now that I've done that, you can see it's selected the cap. So I'm going to call this cap. I'll call it left cap. And this I'm going to, which is the other piece, I'm going to call it left shell. And I like to move them away from each other just so I can examine them a little bit. And here, let's zoom out a little bit. And we'll move the cap over a touch. And let's get some color on here so we can look at our work. Yeah. So we can, oops. You can see by looking here that we've got a nice cap, little 3D print, and the MMCX will fit right in there. And this guy here looks pretty nice as well. We've got nice clearances, and there you have it. You've got 3D printable objects. What I like to do from here is, within MeshMixer, is you select the object for 3D printing and hit Control E to export, or you can go to File, Export, and just name it something. I'm going to call this one Left Show. I can do it. Most slicer programs will do an OBJ or an STL file. We'll just do an object file for now. And that'll write that out to an object. And same thing with the left cap, Control E. There you go. And you've got some 3D printable devices for your ears. You know, I'll eventually make some more videos, I'm hoping, beyond the modeling, but I hope this answers a little bit of your questions and keeps you going in the right direction. Thanks.